Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's the podcast for Backlot Banter where we review every single Best Picture nominee. And now that we know for sure what the nominees are, we can talk about this here film today. That film you clicked on, Nickel Boys, directed by RaMell Ross, starring Ethan Harise, Brandon Wilson, and John Ellis Taylor. I hopefully did
Ingenue Ellis Taylor.
Well, that's a much more normal name when you...
She was in King Richard. We reviewed that movie a few years ago.
Indeed, we did. Anyhow, I'm excited to talk about this film based off of a book by Colson Whitehead. I've read a couple of his books, so I'm interested to hear what you guys think of this adaptation. I haven't read this book that it's based on, but the author I'm familiar with. But this is a bit of a drama film, so we get to sink our teeth into some maybe more classic Oscar action here. So stay tuned for our discussion on that. But first, let's do our little housekeeping, and then we'll dive right in. Last time, we talked about the most controversial film of the season, Emilia Perez. And boy, oh boy, we had a lot of nasty things to say about it, just in general. But we did give it a score, and it got a 4.1 out of 10. So that's at the bottom of the list. If we were comparing that to last year's list, 2024, it would also be at the bottom of last year's list by a solid 3 points. So I highly recommend you go check out that review and hear our thoughts and let us know what yours are. But now I will hand it over to Abram, who's got one or more comments for us to think about.
This is true.
I just got chills.
This is true. We're going to the Conclave episode here. And the first comment I want to shout out very quickly comes from our good friend Phil, who says that BLB fans should be called the anti-popes. Now, here's an important thing. If you didn't watch the episode of the show, which you should do, we were soliciting names for what we should call BLB viewers. Phil, I'm not sold on anti-popes, so please let us know in the comments of this review what BLB fans should be called. I just want to shout that out.
Try again.
I mainly wanted here to shout out a comment from, I believe, a new Quest viewer, or at least a first-time Quest commenter here, Irish Sock, who says...
Nah, they've been around.
Top of the morning, Irish Sock.
Okay.
Hi guys, I need to be more consistently watch you because I always enjoy your discussions. I think that Conclave's ending is incredibly brave and relevant given the current political climate, and it really blows open how narrow most people's understanding of humanity is. Also, as someone who's forced to attend Catholic Mass every Sunday until I turned 18, despite being an atheist since the age of about 11 or 12, and actually despising the Catholic Church for all of the abuse scandals it has been culpable in, I think Conclave does a phenomenal job of balancing the respect that is due to genuine faith and the lack of respect owed to the institution of the church itself.
So true, Irish
Yes,
Irish
so
Sock.
true.
So true. And thank you for your personal anecdotal stories as well.
Everybody's got some thoughts on how their religion impacted their early life or lack thereof. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, let's talk about Nickel Boys. Tanner, would you give us a little bit of a plot synopsis for this film?
Absolutely, Timo. So Nickel Boys is indeed, like you mentioned, a adaptation of a 2019 book that tells the story of largely Elwood, but also a friend that he makes at the Nickel Reformatory School named Turner. These two boys grow up in the Jim Crow South. I believe they're both from the state of Florida, which is where the film is set as well. Elwood is sort of the main character that opens up the film. He is a bright young boy who has plenty of opportunities on the horizon, is quite, involved in the civil rights movement, interested in that as well. And by a series of misunderstandings and classic, miscarriages of justice in the racialized criminal justice system, is sent to the Nickel Reformatory School after being suspected of stealing a car or being helping an accomplice in stealing a car. There he meets Turner, and they begin their friendship at this school that, as you might expect, has some exerts capital punishment on its young students who ages range from like 8 to 18, basically. There's abuse and murder and disappearances that run rampant at this school that is also racially segregated. And ultimately, they decide to try and maybe expose the truth of the camp, but ultimately try to run away. Where spoilers for the end of Nickel Boys in this full discussion, by the way. Elwood is shot and killed, and Turner goes to meet Elwood's grandmother and basically assumes his identity for the rest of the runtime of the film, which is sort of told, narratively interspersed with some segments that take place in the future. I'm sure we'll talk about the narrative structure of the film, but yeah, that's basically the story of Nickel Boys.
Well, thank you, Tanner. Good job. Abram, I'm curious what your thoughts were on this film, given you had a little trouble going to see it, that it took you 2 tries to go see this one.
True.
So what did you think when you finally got to sit down?
Sweeter.
Yeah, and watch it.
True. Showed up to my AMC, and apparently the auditorium was broken, so I had to go to a different AMC further away, which actually ended up being to the benefit of my viewing, because I got to see it with one of my friends, and we went out to dinner after. And we're sort of puzzled by the film. I think what I really love about Nickel Boys was how I felt like I was needing to understand and intuit what almost feels like a new cinematic language in many ways. This film is so formally interesting that I think the fact that I walked out of it and sat down at Applebee's, my previous favorite restaurant, no longer, the chicken tenders are going downhill. Mm-hmm. The fact that we could sit down and really get into the film, not even just thematically, not even just on the writing level, but simply sitting there trying to parse out how the filmmaking is telling a story in a way that neither of us were that familiar with, I think was very moving. And I think it's illustrative of the visionary directorial hand behind Nickel Boys. And so I think that this is a truly excellent movie. I don't think it's necessarily hit me quite as hard as some of the other nominees this year. It's certainly not my favorite, but I think it's doubtlessly the most interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Tucker, what do you think?
I like to wait until see who Timo calls on next.
I saw his eyes darting a little bit. He was choosing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I think I agree that this is the most interesting film that I've seen for this Best Picture lineup, but the only one so far that I have not seen yet is I'm Still Here. And that's because this film is borderline experimental in a couple of ways, and I do think that makes the first act a little bit jarring, and it's tough to understand what the pacing is going to be and how the character narratives are going to work. But I do feel like once you get past that first act and you understand and are sort of bought in a little bit better to the visual stylings of the film, and also I think the narrative gets a major boost when Elwood meets Turner. Yeah. I think that movie's really off to the races there. I'm really compelled by their dynamic. I think their performances are excellent. I think this movie has, just one thing I got to shout out that I think I haven't heard anyone else mention before is I love this movie's color grading. I think it's got a really nice look to it. And especially by the end of the film, the last 10, 15 minutes of this movie, I think are among the best that we've seen in the show for a long time. I do think it is so sparse that for me, it's a little bit hard to get my hands on, but I find it very compelling that a movie of this this level of experimentality was able to receive this level of recognition and acclaim. And so I hugely respect it for it. And for what it's going for, it's really amazing at that, but I'm not accustomed to that. And so it was a little bit difficult for me to personally buy in until the movie had really sunk its hooks into me narratively. And then unfortunately, I think the really solid narrative hooks that really engaged me didn't come until the last 45 minutes of a 2 hour and 20 movie. So I was kind of waiting to really be bought in. Once I really was, but it took a while to get there.
Mm-hmm. I think I would describe this movie as gnawing on a very large piece of steak, in that when you first put it into your mouth, it's unwieldy and tough and kind of physically difficult. As I think it's a little bit unwieldy start of a film, and it's a little physically difficult to watch because of the first person perspective that's just very different than what we're used to seeing, and the ways that both limits our filmmaking but also gives us new avenues for telling the story and explaining what the characters are thinking and feeling in a moment. But then, like a good piece of steak, you get through that and is really delicious later on. And it's got good flavor and is tender. I think the story is kind of special here. Well politically situated, as opposed to Amelia Perez, which we thought was like extremely ill positioned politically in this climate. I think this film is actually occupies a very stable place in its own consideration of its politics, but considering the politics of the rest of the world right now. So I enjoyed it a good amount. I was kind of bored by the beginning, but got to the second half and I thought it was very interesting. And it's cool to see something that I feel the artisticness, not just the artistry, because we see artistry a lot in these films where people working at the tops of their craft, but this one has an artistic intentionality to it that is just kind of eschewed in the rest of filmmaking, and especially in these other Best Picture nominees, which go by more traditional methods. And so like Tucker or Abram opened us up with, I think it was Abram who gave the point about it being very new and a new language.
Yeah.
That is something that I appreciate a lot. And it, for me, hits and misses on this film, but by and large, by the end of the movie, I'm completely bought in, and I really liked it. And that ending was very powerful. So, yeah. Overall, good marks from me.
Yeah. Positively brilliant is kind of how I would describe this film. I was in the bag. Yeah, it's a smash success for me personally. I was in the bag for it basically from these opening minutes, and was really taken by basically every turn that RaMell Ross and the other filmmakers behind this had in mind. The performances are absolutely stunning, and yes, of course, we will be talking about the cinematic language of this film, which has been done in circumspect ways beforehand, but never truly to the degree that Ross is operating on here. This film operates at a degree, at a tenor that is very rarely ever replicated for me personally, in my enjoyment, in my involvement in the film even. I was determining whether or not to save this, but I will just open it up at this point. There's I'll tease it out a little bit. There's a particular moment in this film that flipped my brain inside out in a way that I've never experienced in a film before. And so I just have to give it marks for doing that specific thing and then operating at that same intense, beautiful, empathetic, humane level for 2 hours and 20 minutes, giving you so much humanity to chew on, so much great character to chew on, but also operating in a realm of directorial prowess that is extremely impressive, given that this is RaMell Ross's first feature film. He's directed a documentary before, a feature documentary, but never a fictional or feature film. So it's truly a brilliant filmic experiment for me that I loved from beginning to end.
Well, should we start at this unique perspective the film takes, the one that we all noted feels so different to watch, the ostensibly first-person view that this film takes, although, like any good rules, it breaks it plenty when it needs to.
Course.
But
yes.
What did you guys make of that creative choice, both in a filmic and logistic way, but also in a story and a meaning way for this film? The choice to center us within our main character's frame of mind, within his point of view.
I think for me, ultimately, it's interesting because the first person perspective that we occupy for a lot of the narrative is most exciting for the character that our first person perspective is playing against. I think about a moment about midway through the film when Elwood's grandma comes to visit him and is unable to, and runs into Turner instead and hugs Turner twice in this very complicated emotional moment. And the way that the camera moves up into the crook of her neck, I think feels so intimate in a way that I think is hard to accomplish in film.
You as a person have seen that
Yeah.
over and I have seen that exact framing in my own vision,
Yeah.
countless
Mhm.
times in my life.
Yeah.
It opens up a dialogue, I think, with the person that is speaking to our first person character, whether it is Elwood, whether it's Turner, in this way that sort of recontextualizes their performance. Because, of course, in the overwhelming majority of film, direct to camera address is a fourth wall breaking technique.
Mhm.
But here it's not. It simply is a maintaining an eye contact with the subject, and the way we're sort of transposed to become the subject ourselves is really fascinating. And I think it makes me think about how other characters are performing differently. It makes me
Sure.
feel differently as a viewer. And I think,
Yeah.
moreover, it just creates this emotional attachment to every small moment and every small action that I think you
Yeah.
take for granted when you're watching film from, for lack of a better term, the traditional perspective.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, traditional, I think, is a very fair word to say here, because this is maybe one of, I don't know, across the course of film history, let's just say 50 movies ever that like have really committed.
Hardcore
And that might
Henry.
even, yeah. Tanner
Yes.
and I were making hardcore Henry jokes last night after
We
we
were
finished reviewing.
actually funny that
When
it
we
came
finished
up,
reviewing
yeah.
Presence, which is
Yes.
another first-person film,
Exactly, yes.
another film that used that in to great effect. Go see Presence. It
Yeah.
is going to leave theaters soon, probably. But I'm very glad you keyed in on one thing that I think is the strength of this movie and the strength of the first-person perspective. Is this movie is about the mindless action. It's about the ethereal, soft moments of letting your mind wander and like just like fiddling with something, or like just staring off into the distance. That is what I mean. I felt like a very solid chunk of the runtime of this film, like on a shot by shot basis, is one of our characters that we are inhabiting in the camera, just zoning out and like playing with the grass, or like listening to a conversation that's going on. Like they're like half listening to it, but it's like they're like paying attention to the fan blades like going on overhead. And that was really jarring at first, because the first like 15 minutes of this movie are like all that. And we barely learn Elwood's name at the beginning of it. We don't
Yeah.
really understand his situation. And because it's all first person and he's also a child at the beginning of the film, it is especially when he's a child, it's very much about the fact that he's a kid with an active imagination whose mind is constantly wandering. And that level of insertion into the mind of a character, I thought was like, it was confusing at first, but reflecting on it, I think that's the film's biggest strength, is being able to associate yourself with the mindset of a character who is just like any person, not always completely focused on a situation, not always completely cogs turning all the time. There are these moments in all of our lives, and of course in the lives of Elwood and Turner, where your mind wanders, where you do something that you're not really like fully conscious or thinking about. You're fiddling with a leaf, whatever it is. And those small moments, because we're in the first person point of view, and also, Tim, I can't wait for you to get to like dig into this. The sound design is mixed in such like extreme ways that like it really calls to attention to both sound wise and visually, that we are in the mind of a character who is just just there. We're just there. We're just living through these small moments that aren't what a film would traditionally focus on. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, we invoked them, but like, you know, the more recent stabs at doing, you know, this first person POV for the entirety of the film are more, of course, focused on like taking the character from place to place to basically only to forward the narrative. The camera is still treated as, or the person, the character is still treated as the camera, ostensibly.
Yeah.
Overwhelmingly or overbearingly so. This is the case in Presence, that for a film that I also absolutely enjoyed. The presence, the ghost is moving from scene to scene to observe scenes happening between characters. Or Hardcore Henry, it is a nonstop go of our main character going from action sequence to action sequence,
Mhm.
basically to push the audience through a bus that's exploding or what have you. Whereas this treats
It's quite
the
different.
camera as character and as you. RaMell Ross is doing this fascinating thing where he's folding all three of these things that exist only in aesthetic together. He is folding in the idea of the character of Elwood or Turner. He's folding in you on top of that, putting you in their perspective, and then also using the camera as a tool to tie those things, to cinch those two things together, to create a profound sense of empathy in the story. And again, it is unlike anything I've ever experienced before. I will go ahead and, I used the phrase "turned my brain inside out" earlier in one of these tiny moments that Tucker was talking about. It is a moment where I forget if it's Elwood or Turner is playing with a coin in their hand, and he's just looking down at the coin that he's like twiddling between his fingers. And my brain is like, well, that's weird. I can't feel the coin. And then I snapped out of it for a second. I was like, I'm not the character right now. What's going on? My brain was like so convinced that I was in this, that I was the character, that I was experiencing this. That I was like, well, why can't I feel this thing that I have in my hand? Absolutely never, ever had that happen to me before in watching the film. It was a super surreal experience that I was like, damn, that is impressive what RaMell Ross has pulled off here in his crafting of this. A technical achievement, of course, in how he achieved this, but also operating on a higher level than like using the camera. He's playing on a level of how you experience the camera as a audience member. It's baffling, really.
I really like how this film is completely unafraid to really go with this perspective, this point of view, and how you'll be in a dialogue scene or characters are talking to each other, and we're locking eye contact, we're looking right down the barrel of the lens between them, and somebody just looks away, drifts away, and we don't necessarily, in traditional montage Eisensteinian editing, you want to go, you see a character look at something, and then you cut to the thing that they're looking at, and then you cut back to their face to see what they think of it. And in this, you actually cut out all of the seeing what a character thinks of the situation that they're in, because we can't see their face, except when we can in the reflections, which is another piece of brilliant filmmaking in this, because that's probably CGI, because you normally see a camera when you pointed at a mirror. The way that the directed attention of the camera is the focus point of our characters, like you said, Tanner, is an extremely empathetic way to make filmmaking. And it's just outside of this kind of cause and effect relationship that we're so used to seeing with editing, because we kind of ellipse editing out of this. When we do edit, we use it to skip time, we use it to skip a location, or we do change perspectives, as in the second half of the film we flip-flopped, so we're in both first persons. But in those earlier scenes where we just allow ourselves to kind of drift away, it's so obviously important what we're looking at to the character whose mind we're in. That does all the work necessary to make us identify and like the character. That is everything we need to really know about someone to be one with them and to be rooting for them for the rest of the film. Just showing what their thought process is in a situation, which is where you look. And that like intimate familiarity with the view that this film has, just like the ways that it has all these frames that we've seen before. The ways that it pans around is not a way that we've seen before on screen, but is a way that we've seen before every freaking day of our life. And that, as like a distillation, as a piece of art, I think is extremely impressive, because how often do you get such like identifiable and recognizable footage that is carefully crafted and is not just by accident, like you would maybe get in a more documentary setting?
I'm interested also in the absence of score in a lot of scenes. I think that the quietness that the film often inhabits, although it's also very intentionally loud in other moments, but I think that when we are quiet, it serves to reinforce your perspective, Tanner, because I think we sort of begin to wash away, to your point, Timo, a lot of the hallmarks of filmmaking. I mean, it's obviously a big difference between a lot of modern filmmaking and a lot of old Hollywood filmmaking is the presence or continual presence of sound and score, and so often we're without that, and I think that often brings us, as you're saying, Tanner, closer to the character because there's a plainness about the soundscape often that that doesn't really mediate the distance between you and the screen that much. In fact, it just draws you closer.
Yeah.
So I find that very interesting.
The soundscape's so real. Like we hear so much going on well outside the bounds of the frame. I think it's much more expansive than the shots that we see. So we hear a lot more than what we're seeing, and that fills us in with a lot of context. But it's very realistic. I notice a lot of the time, and it's like
I think
quality.
The part of the style that I had the hardest time connecting with, though, is the way dialogue is presented. I think that the mix of the dialogue for the first person character is awkward. I feel as a viewer, but moreover, I
think all the dialogue, frankly, in my opinion.
Well, I was talking to Jean about this on the way home because she and I were just sharing our perspectives on it, and I said that I felt like we're missing a key element of how dialogue is usually edited. I mean, a lot of the conversations we're seeing here in a more archetypal film would be shot reverse shot conversations, and there is that beat in the cut that hides a pause in conversation that isn't present here. So it almost feels like there's this moment as though I'm playing a first-person video game where I'm selecting a dialogue choice, and then that dialogue plays in response to the person in front of me. And I think that beat, that just extra beat, was the hardest for me to sort of wrap my head around as a viewer. And I think it's when I felt the most alienated from the way the camera was being used.
Yeah. Well, I think that I'm going to combine both what you just said you had a difficult time with, but also what Timo was just complimenting of the camera work being a way that we sort of sutured into the view of the character, is both of these things reflect primarily Elwood, that he's our primary lens into this film, and how he is a pretty quiet person, and he's a pretty shy person, and he doesn't really make eye contact that often, and he takes a while to think of what he's going to say, or sometimes he doesn't respond at all. And that, I think, to my own point of the first bit of the movie being a little bit hard to get into, Elwood as a quiet child and not getting almost any response from the first person point of view in many sequences is kind of unnerving. I think obviously very intentional, but I do agree that it is something that I kept wanting to like. I think because I'm very much a screenplay person, and it is dialogue and word choice that connects me to the personality of a character, this film opts for a sense of timing and camera movement to be what is adding personality to whichever character we're inhabiting. And as I was not getting like, what is Elwood's, how is the way that he talks? How is the way that he responds to people in so many situations where he's quiet? I, as someone who loves a witty dialogue and loves someone to like deliver a snappy line, was like, well, I don't get to really know Elwood that well. But I do think that is me needs to reframe my brain quite a bit to this film that is approaching cinematic personality in such a different way, because we really do get a lot in the moments where he is quiet. And then you have to think to yourself, why didn't he respond? Why is he uncomfortable in the situation? Why is he choosing to be quiet? And like, you can kind of feel the gears turning, but not responding. Or when the camera does drift away and he's not locking eyes with another character, okay, that means I can't see their lips, so I have to pay a little bit more attention to like what the dialogue is saying, and it kind of affects the mix a little bit. But why did he choose to look away in this situation? I think that is the personality. It is the quiet moments that make, especially Elwood as a character, someone that you really learn to empathize with over the course of the film. But it's so different from the way I usually connect with characters that for a good chunk of the first part of the movie, I'm like, I don't really feel like I get this guy. I don't really understand what's going through his head. But it just took a while for me to sink into that.
Mm-hmm.
For me, let that sink in.
My kind of disconnect with the beginning of the film, and I remarked to Tucker that it bored me to tears at the beginning, but that's a hyperbole. It did not. the reason that I think I felt that way was more of a narrative issue, is that in the beginning of the film, I don't feel our stakes very much. What happens if something goes wrong, or like what are our characters fighting for? It's the civil rights backdrop of the film. I think there's this kind of dueling historical context that is very consciously placed here, and it's the civil rights movement and it's the space race, and these two ideas that, you know, it's like we are forced to endure this reform school narrative while we are sprinkling in reminders of the achievements of humanity / America, these wondrous achievements of science, at the same time as we are still whipping and beating black kids in a reform school. That idea comes about much later in the narrative, and for the beginning, we are just kind of piddling around with Elwood's wants and his like dreams and his aspirations, and it's not till we're introduced in the reform school and he's been there a little while that I think the film really sets. It's not until that first scene where he's flogged, that I think our stakes are like truly actually turned up to what movie stakes, basically. Well, a level of drama that like
it's very
kind
slice of life
expecting.
up to that point.
It is, and you know, I've gone on the record many times in this show being like, I really like that, and for this one, it just kind of left me being a little unsatisfied until maybe because of lack of extra information about what's going on, and or that I can't see Elwood reacting to stuff. I can only see him reacting through his gaze.
I don't even know what his face looks like until halfway through the film.
Yeah.
So, but then we actually do introduce some stakes, and they're great. I love them. They work really well. They're very dramatic, and they pay off very nicely in the end. I kind of predicted it, but that's okay. I'm not gonna be all up in arms about it.
It's interesting you guys to hear you guys bring that up. The stakes or lack thereof at the beginning of the movie, because I think it's a very deliberate choice in the characterization of Elwood that really threw me through a loop for a second, because he is presented as a relatively inexperienced, or he's a young man still. He's quite
I think he's
quite
got
naive.
some stability though. He's the whole arc with the teacher that's very interested in getting him into civil
very
rights.
Book smart, and he has these aspirational or really reverential feelings towards the civil rights movement and wanting to get involved with them. He expresses this towards his grandmother, Angelina Ellis Taylor, who portrays the character Hattie, is the grandmother's name, and she kind of has this weary look towards him as he's expressing these things, that like maybe he doesn't fully understand what he is putting himself, or what he will be putting himself through, committing to this movement. The teacher, who is portrayed by Jimmy Fails, the star of Last Black Man in San Francisco, another like super underrated film from a couple years ago. He has this scene briefly where he talks about his time as a freedom rider, and how he was hit across the head with a tire iron by a white man in a protest, and all of these sequences at the beginning, while also sprinkling in or layering in quite heavily these fractured memories of his childhood. You also get this idea that Elwood is going, he has a bright future ahead of him in many regards that is quickly sidetracked by the realities of the world that he'd maybe been somewhat sheltered from, as opposed to a character like Turner, who has been on the run from Houston and riding the rail cars and et cetera, et cetera. And it is not until, Timo, you're right, the true horrible realities of the camp fall upon him that like the real weight of things settle in, and yet the enthusiasm, or maybe not enthusiasm, the optimism of the character remains intact.
Elwood has a twinkle of resistance in his eye always.
Yes, it's a perfect pairing of an optimist character and a realist character in Elwood and Turner. Their scenes out on the street with the the looking up at the mirror, that kind of sequence is all about like we can we can take down Nickel from the inside, basically. We can expose the secrets going on here, and Turner having this rebuttal of like, they don't care. It's not going to work. It's institutional. It's the world that we live in.
And
You
there's
just
a
have
bunch
to
of
wait
them.
it out.
We are not in the only one of these schools in the country.
Yeah, that you either die, you wait it out, or you escape. And the escape is, you know, leaning towards dying in most cases. But no, yeah, I think the pairing of these characters and the context of which the story is set in this Jim Crow era, where Timo, you're right. I love the juxtaposition of the space race, this great forward progress of world, and you know, the bounds that humanity is taking, led by America, is juxtaposed against the very harsh realities of like the world that truthfully still exists for many more people.
Yeah. And I think that element of interspersing other footage and other narrative beats, and there's photographs in there, and there's like low f-stop
One of my favorite
in there,
moments
and
is from the photographs. I'll tell you about it after you're done.
I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is really where, obviously, we're talking about how unique the first person perspective of this film is. But that's really where I felt this film like really edged towards the experimental. I am not someone who personally enjoys experimental filmmaking that much. I have a lot of artistic respect for it, but I find it very difficult to sit through. But I feel like, for the most part, but the way that Nickel Boys uses just a hard cut to something in the context of like what we're used to in editing, totally unrelated to what just happened, but in the bounds of the film, thematically related, I think is really, really fascinating. And the way that we can just cut to footage from an old film, or from stock footage of things, or just like people going about their lives, whether that's black and white footage or footage that within the time that we have been experiencing to this point in the film is like outside of that. We'll be like in the 60s in Elwood's like, you know, teenage years, and then we cut to like digital footage from like the 2000s or like the 90s or whatever.
VHS home video stuff, yeah.
And your mind is like, this is not right. Like, no, we're supposed to be like, the digital footage isn't invented yet. Like, these people that are like, you know, using digital camera stuff, it's like, this is not quite right. But that is a really bold creative decision to end a lot of sequences, and instead of transitioning time through in world montages, it's external montages of all sorts of different things, taking in different types of media from different eras, that because it is all presented within this film that is non-linearly edited in the grand scope of things, and also even within like acts of the film, it's very like chopped up, like you'll just cut and you're someone totally different. It's very fragmented in the way that it's paced. It all ends up feeling at home. And I really find that like to me that's the most creatively interesting part of this movie, is that they're willing to, even within a drama that's in the first person, also intersperse all this other different stuff in there that makes you think about like, why did they choose this photo? Why did they choose this bit of home footage of people like at a party, or hanging out on the stoop, or in Halloween costumes or stuff? I think it's really, really fascinating.
Yeah.
I think the film it's concerned with, in my view, at the highest level, it's concerned with this notion of distance in American history.
Sure.
A moment very early on in the film that I totally love returns to the teacher that helps Elwood. We're introduced to him in this classroom setting where he's giving his students permanent markers, not to highlight parts of American history, but instead to black them out. And I think it's a really interesting idea to establish early on in the narrative, because I think what this film really resists is the traditional impulse, I think, to frame stories about civil rights struggle in America as period pieces, as something that exists squarely in the past. Nickel Boys isn't interested in that. It's interested, I think, instead interested in drawing your eye to the idea that we're not talking about history here, really. And when we're with Turner in the more present parts of the narrative, we're not even talking about much more than a couple decades ago. I think the film is interested in being, in some ways, unstuck in time to illustrate that you can't think of civil rights struggle in America through this more archetypal, period-led, prescribed
1959
narrative.
to 1970 parentheses kind of, you know.
Exactly. We're blacking that idea out and we're replacing it with this more fluid reality of the struggle for civil rights that persists to this day in America.
The prowess with which RaMell Ross and the other screenwriter of this, of course based on a book, but the
Jocelyn
screenwriter
Barnes.
Jocelyn Barnes, the prowess with which they approach like making a civil rights story, which of course, as we know, as people who have watched all 96 Best Picture winners and are familiar with the Academy's fare outside of that, there is a proclivity towards civil rights stories. Of course, they are grand totemic stories of people standing against the system. But because of that storied history, of course, many of them can be looked at, especially in the modern age, as being flattened down to maybe what some might call awards bait, or maybe just paint by numbers sort of civil rights storytelling stuff. Pick your historical name out of the history book, look them up on Wikipedia, copy that, and put that into a film, basically.
Yeah.
What this is doing is so much richer and so much different, to the point to the directions that Abram was talking about. Yeah, really focusing upon not just like these boys who are not historical figures by any means. They are lives that were lived and lives that were lost there, just like many of these institutions that existed in real life in America. I recently watched a Oscar nominated documentary from this year called Sugarcane, which is about very similar institutions set up for Native American children. A lot of the same ground being tread there, and these sort of crimes that were dealt out and overlooked. But then you have these moments that we're talking about where we're mixing in VHS footage, and yes, we're even mixing in like Stanley Kramer's The Defiant Ones from 1958.
Great film. Great film. Watch it if you haven't.
Yeah.
But like,
that's also a Best Picture nominee.
I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
But my point being, like, all these moments of footage that these photographs and these artifacts, if you want to use that word, because that's a weighty word for how long ago this stuff was, that are interspersed, these photographs and videos that are interspersed into the film, are more about like the lives lived, the Black experience of America that happened not so long ago. It's exactly what Ross and screenwriter, I forgot her name again, Jocelyn Barnes are dealing with here.
My favorite moment of that, as I was gonna go over earlier, is in what I believe is the center turning point of the film, that flogging sequence where Elwood is brought to this kind of mysterious room.
The White House.
The White House. First, think about that name for a moment. The sound design for this scene, the way that the use both in the set decoration of this fan that turns on and that spins up and whirs, and you have this rhythmic, mechanical, very loud, full spectrum. You got your lows, mids, highs, and the frequencies.
I just want to jump in, Timo, and say, like, you hear it earlier in the film, like from a distance, of course.
You can.
It's in this very strange thing, like putting you in the mind of Elwood. That like he hears this, he's like, "What is that? What's going on?" And then all the other boys in the dormitory or whatever light up like matches or lighters or whatever and say, "Ice cream." You're like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah, it's very disorienting. You feel
it puts you in if you guys have ever been to like a summer camp or something like that, or in an entirely new environment where there is an inbuilt culture that you are not accustomed to, and you just like, what the hell is going? What are you guys talking about? What is this noise? What is everyone saying? What is everyone doing? It's a great moment that then, of course, is leads directly into Timo. You can continue with describing this first scene in the White House.
So we follow Elwood into the White House as we see this like evil teacher administrator prepare to strike him, and we cut away. We don't ever see any whipping in the film. It hints with some scarring earlier, but the thing that it cuts away to is
some scarring later.
Yeah.
On his legs.
Oh, okay.
In the pool when the camera's looking up at his legs.
Oh, I didn't even
around
catch
his
that.
leg.
I saw some on a character's back in the shower, like
Yeah, in
a
the
scene
shower
or two
thing, yeah.
prior to this White House one. But it cuts to a montage of very, very zoomed in faces from a
Yeah.
singular black and white
Crazy.
photograph. And the effect of this bit of archival, or either archival or they made it for this film, is that these faces are on the farthest edge of identifiable as a face as you can get. They are mere blobs and forms in grayscale that you know is a face, that you as a human see the shape that it is, but you cannot see any
pattern recognition brain.
Yeah, you cannot see any definition to it. You cannot read any expression. And some of them are.
They start off
Yeah.
being able to tell what it is.
You can tell,
read the
and
expression. But it devolves until I think there's a couple at the end that aren't faces
That are-
I think that might just be like, texture in the background of the photo, but your mind is still searching. You're
Mhm.
trying to grapple for, is that the edge of a nose? Is that like the definition of an eyebrow?
And then we keep zooming out here through this photo montage as we hear the strikes happening. It's all timed up and synced. And then we are behind Elwood, as we come to assume that it is, behind his head as he's looking at it on a computer, and he's looking at this
For the first time in the film.
Yeah, for the first time in the film. And we now, like you guys were talking about, sort of the atemporal properties of this film, that it goes to great lengths to kind of distance itself from being a period piece or a contemporary film, that now we are, like we are in a modern enough age. There's a computer. It's, he's got a hairstyle that's much more modern, and just like the effect of that just fills me with thoughts about, oh, he is remembering these faces. He is immediately brought back to this night, like the photo, that White House incident, the flogging, the time at the camp, him being out of there now in the present. It's all wrapped up and thrown together in that one little sequence with this one shot behind the head. It's really, really effective. It's really unsettling. It really turns the tone of the film. It's an excellent midpoint. I've been thinking a lot as I've been working on my own documentary about plot and like, okay, how do you construct an act one? How do you construct the transition between setting up your story and getting into the meat of the story? How do you invert the action in the middle of the story so that it stays interesting for the second half? How do you propel into a climactic third act? Like, these macro ideas of script economy and story structure reveal themselves in films like this, where it's like, that's completely the midpoint. The film changes drastically from there. And it's so fun to see a very unique interpretation of what do you do in a midpoint. Because we could bring up a million examples of how more traditional films would invert their narrative or recontextualize it. And this, like, going to this a somewhat modern era, bringing in these archival materials, and it all like ramps up in usage for the second half of the film. I think that's like that's where we turned it up to 11 for me. Like, this is a really excellent sequence.
There is one other thing I want to note about that. Before he is sort of, shackled or whatever you want to say to this beam where they inflict the flogging,
Of which we could see like blood on the walls and stuff. Great set
of
decorating that tells us everything we need to know about this room.
That is when the film first cuts to third person. Is when you see you see the back of the head of Elwood as he's walking up to the post or whatever. And I find that to be such an incredible decision from RaMell, because it is effectively saying, we are not deigning to understand or put you in the perspective of Elwood as he underwent this punishment, as he underwent this torture. That's when and then of course you cut to the photographs that you guys mentioned already, and then the modern day thing, which, do we want to talk about the end? Well, we can talk about the ending in a bit, because that's also another brilliant stroke of genius, is having that third person with the reveal and everything at the end that I want to talk about. But yeah, I just found that to be an incredible decision that comes right in that turn moment that Timo was talking about. the inverting of the action, et cetera, et cetera.
It's just mastery of your tools. It's like, your sculptor really knows what chisel to use in what moment. And,
Like you're carving soap.
RaMell Ross, yes, like carving
Mhm.
soap. Ross totally knows the tools that he's choosing to use here and how to use them super effectively.
Yeah.
I'm also interested in this film's challenging of the blatantly false notion that that the carceral system in the U.S. is predicated on rehabilitation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. The 4 stages or whatever they say.
Yeah.
So there's a very interesting moment in the film when, let me start with this. As we're introduced to the academy, we're introduced to it through, I think, what people imagine the carceral system is here to do, which is to have people work their way through this learning that makes them better people that can then be reintegrated into society. I think what this film is interested in showing in a very necessary and overt way is the fact that indeed that's not the case, and instead slavery does still exist to this day in the United States of America
Mhm.
in prison. There
And
was
it's
this
allowed.
there's this interesting interview that one of my favorite Twitch streamers, Hassan Piker, did recently with incarcerated firefighters in California who are helping to
Mhm.
fight the
Yes.
wildfires.
Yeah, this was a big news story back over the summer.
And these guys who are here, on the front lines of the fire, risking their lives, they tell us at one point that they're being paid $180 a month for that work.
Mhm.
It is nothing short of slavery. And I think that the way that this film constructs this prison environment that on its face is about this literal learning and this literal rehabilitation, but indeed is about work, about physical labor,
Yep.
about these touchstones of not just
Exploitation.
physical labor and exploitation, but archetypal slave labor is extremely interesting. They're working in fields. There's like a young child who maybe couldn't be older than first or second grade
Mhm.
working in the fields. There's literally a whipping post, as we've been talking about. The film is so interested in exposing the fact that prison in the United States is not what it purports to be. Indeed, it is something different. And again, this is where I think it moves out of the realm of period piece, because it's tying together this larger false narrative in American history that the era of slavery is a complete era of the past. It just simply isn't in these institutions. And I think the film is very good at illustrating the ways that there are still these deep racist institutions in America.
And you know what? There aren't. We don't have any overt racist characters in this. We don't have characters going around yelling epithets, degrading black people. The violence is really shown to be systemic.
It's
and
part of the institutional. It's
and
part of the
it's-
institution that they exist in. Yeah.
Yeah, even the only like person-to-person violence is this very weird scene where we have like it's with the cane where this like old white guy is like poking and prodding Elwood
Yep.
towards the beginning, and it's never explained. It's never like really delved into more, and so it just leaves me to try to fill in the blanks there, be like, what was going on? And it's like I gotta be honest, I can't fully fill it in, but it leaves such a gross taste in my mouth that it's, and that happens before we even get to the reform school.
Nickel, yeah. I think I want to tie in what Abram was just mentioning about the reflection of modernity. And then Tanner, I want to call back to when you used the word artifact and then you sort of corrected yourself. And I think that is something that I really felt myself feeling towards the end of the movie as more and more modern stuff, recognizable things to us, like computers and the research that Elwood, but in reality, it's actually
Turner. Yeah.
Turner, yeah, that he's doing using website and like emails and stuff like that. it, to me, created this really discordant moment, especially as he was looking at the unearthing of nickel and the like dug up artifacts that you have to like do archaeology basically on to like figure out what is this little bit of rusted metal. Here's what the size is. They're like, things are cordoned off, and they're like digging this
they're
up
using
as
the ground penetrating radar and stuff like articles that he's reading through.
Exactly. And this stuff, these technologies that I would say for most people you associate with, that's how you dig up ancient Rome. That's how you get the mummies out of the ground. Like, this is stuff that like my mind is tuned to stuff that is so far past, so far in the past that it's ostensibly unrelatable to us. Placing that in the context of someone who is looking at this happen, and a rusted bit of metal from nickel is presented in the way that I would imagine a rusted bit of
a Roman drachma
art,
or something.
Yeah, but all this stuff this guy is looking at is stuff that was not only when he was a kid, like he was alive during this time, but it was from people that, as audience members through the world of this film, we have been presented as people living their lives, and little bits of toys and things that they are fiddling with because they're children at this institution are presented as if they are like, it unlocked in my mind like this kind of like stuff that is like archaeology. Oh, it's so far in the past, can happen within the lifetime of one person.
Yeah.
And like I had this like moment as I sat there, I was like, oh, like that is.
Yeah.
I mean, I never really thought about it in that way. Obviously, we're not old enough for that to have happened for us, for that reality to have set in.
I will say,
but
real
I was
quick,
sitting there like, man,
this story and the documentary I'm working on really feel like they're speaking in the same circle. Like the whole idea, like, I don't know, I hope to use ground penetrating radar to prove some crime happened to my subject in the documentary. Like exact same stuff within the lifetime, within the same time period. And so I think this film does a really good job of like historicizing it in a way that we see kind of both sides of the coin. In a way, I think the actual coin that he picked, the penny that he picks up that's got the tails on both sides, has some metaphorical value. But like the two sides of this historical equation, we need to fully understand both of them in order to get why it's so emotionally impactful for Turner to be sitting there and going through it. Because that like motivation for why are we seeing these things? Why is the film showing this to us is all explained while we think he's Elwood. And then especially after we find out that he's Turner, this like that longing and that kind of reckoning with this. What is the unearthing of the evidence of our nation's past crimes do to the people who they were perpetrated against? What is that emotional experience like for them? I think there's a little bit of a subplot of the relationship that Turner here at the end is attempting to go through. We see him with at least two different women who have varying levels of ability to deal with this intense trauma that their partner has. Like
the scene in the bar, he mentions that like, she mentioned that I need to work on myself.
Yeah, and so we get a complete arc because we see the couple, we find out that they're broken up, and then we see a new couple, and the new one is
when he's much older.
When he's much older, is a loving and supportive relationship where there's like that open understanding of how this past like is not the past, how this past is the present and the now, both for our main character in these scenes, Turner, but also for us, because we, as members of this current moment, see news stories identical to what is shown on the frame, in the computer screens and whatnot. This like unearthing of relics that describe how schools is not uncommon in our news cycle.
Of course. I mean, I'll mention it again. The documentary Sugarcane is nominated at the Oscars this year. It's available on Disney Plus and Hulu. You can watch it there.
Well, I'll be honest. I hear about reform schools more out of Canada than out of the U.S. Right?
Sugarcane is about a school in Canada. Yeah. But yeah, there were many of them. I believe more of them actually. I'm remembering the text from the end of that documentary. There are more of them in the United States than there were in Canada, actually. And Anyway, but like after I saw the film a couple days ago, I did go in ahead and do some reading on it. I looked at some interviews from Ross and everything like that, and found the original novel also is about the Nickel Reformatory School, which is fictional, but it is based on the Arthur G. Dozier School for Boys, which did exist from 1900 to shut down in 2011.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, it really
there are still some of these similar sounding boys camps out in Texas here that are like mix between juvenile detention reform school and summer camp, and every once in a while you drive past one or you see somebody wearing a t-shirt, and it's all very recognizable. It's all you can pretty much tell one of the, especially with the t-shirts, and this film has good production or costuming in the use of clothing to indicate the status and of our characters.
So I want to talk about the performances and the characters of our two leads here. Just because I think we talked about Elwood quite a bit a little bit earlier, but I think Brendan Wilson as Turner deserves probably equal time given. But I kind of want to work backwards in terms of talking about the character. Speaking directly, of course, about how Daveed Diggs plays the older version of Turner. First of all, wanting to note, just to get it out there, that like again, the utilization of third person is just so well done here, so adept in like that last 10 minutes where the realization becomes clear that it is in fact not Elwood that we've been spending time with in the future, but in fact Turner, who has assumed Elwood's identity in an effort to stay safe. And of course, Nickel can't do anything about it because that would imply that they have killed Elwood in some way, some fashion. So he is he has this tenuous safety, but he is living as a person who he is not. And that is why we have that third person perspective. We are no longer truly in Elwood's perspective as we truly thought. He feels like he is out of his own body, out of his own identity, as most people know him. Presumably his girlfriends, his wives, his friends, whoever, know him as Elwood. The guy he meets in the bar knows him as Elwood, presumably. We sort of play the name game here. He just asks, like, what about that guy you spend time with? But you understand that, like, he's been living as Elwood for 30, 40 years at this point. And God, when you realize that, and you realize why RaMell has been using this third person perspective for the future stuff, it's another moment where I was completely spun out by the prowess there.
His wife, though, towards the very end of the film, calls him Turner.
Oh, does okay? Well, there you go.
So it does seem that, like, yes, he does hide, but that at least for this one character, there is a semblance of a recovery of sense of self there with the help of this loving relationship.
Yeah. Also important to know that is a relationship that is, from what we see, happening years into his life, presumably after a lot of this this research and self-reckoning has come, because we see him doing this course of easily 2 decades or more.
Yeah, I mean, this is we go from like 62 to, I don't know, if we really want to push it, like maybe
at least
20, like the 2010s,
probably? 2018. We see there's a date at the top of the article.
Yeah, 2018. Yeah, so he's like nearly 70 at that point.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. And I also, for me, what's most powerful about this third-person camera twist, basically, is the way that they use costume design, I guess, with the haircut that Turner has grown, covers so much of him that it's obviously just unclear at the beginning, like who they're supposed to be, but you don't even really get to see his skin tone for a lot of that. And the moment that I really realized that there was a twist, and it's actually not Elwood and it's Turner assuming the identity of Elwood, is a very, very quick moment when he is greeting the person that he has a conversation with at the bar, and he turns his head and you see just a sliver of his face. I'm like, Elwood has much darker skin tone than that. And that moment where I'm like, because then it like made me think about the framing and the costumes he was wearing, and like just seeing like the back of his hands for like fleeting moments, but I never really internalized the fact that they obviously the two characters have different skin tones, and And then I'm like paying attention to like how the hair falls on his neck. And I'm like, oh, well, okay, I can see actually that this is a lighter skin tone than Elwood had. And that, I think, framing of all of this with the third person perspective and the hair that covers his neck and like the costume, and I'm like, that is really clever stuff, because it didn't really occur to me, to be honest, until that moment that I saw the flash of like the side of his face. But as that happened, then it like forced me to ask so many questions. Of course, those are answered by the end of the film, but that fleeting moment of him like barely turning his head, I was like, oh, this has like 6 different ramifications that are really, really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mentioned earlier like the pairing of our realist Turner versus and our optimist in Elwood.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean their dynamic is just so good. The chemistry between these two performers is just so goddamn good. I mean, you have to buy the friendship of it all. And I think RaMell does a very smart choice here. The first time that you see Elwood's face from a different perspective is when we jump to Turner's POV, which we do a number of times throughout the film following that. But like, because we've come to know that he is, he's keeping his eyes down a little bit, but he also he stands up for like, what he thinks is right. He stops tries to stop this fight going on, and that's what initially gets him in trouble and sent to the White House and everything. So but when you cut to Turner's perspective, you really get a sense of how Ethan Harris maybe is playing Elwood with like this reservation, with hunched shoulders and keeping his eyes down and not really wanting to say anything, but knowing he should, because he does want to do the right thing all the time, even if it gets him in trouble with the other boys or the teachers at the school or the essentially prison camp, whatever. And then, I mean, he looks at Turner in all these in the exact opposite way. Turner is expressed as so confident. He knows the camp, he knows the school like the back of his hand. He's been there. This is the second time he's been there, as we come to learn. And the interplay between the two of them is so good, especially as you understand the performances. I was reading. Sometimes the camera is mounted on camera operators. But sometimes it is mounted on Harris or Wilson in the scene, which gives a whole other dimension to their connection, of course, but also the talent of the performer to have a giant rig strapped to them and still feel so natural in that moment.
Must have been. I wonder which camera they shot it on, but I would imagine it's the Sony camera that you can take the sensor block and lens attachment separate from the computer part, which is the much heavier and bulkier part, and it's connected by a wire. There's some pretty crazy looking rigs where you have a guy, the assistant, wearing like a metal vest that has like a bunch of batteries and wires and antennas like attached to it, and then there's a cable going to another dude, the actual camera operator, who's got the tiny little rig, like moving it around and operating it. And just like the way that this has like that choice to do first person spews out an endless list of technical ramifications that must have been overcome to just allow us to watch the film in the first place. So there's very impressive on that.
Really, like, again, throws me for a loop, it being like, there were like people standing around these guys. Of course, that's the case for every single movie that's ever existed. Is that there's a dozen or 24 plus people all like surrounding these actors.
And you must remember that every movie is only the frame in which you see. As soon as the frame ends, it's the set. It doesn't exist anymore usually.
But it feels so intimate that it just feels weird to know that there was like guys wearing battery packs 2 feet away or whatever.
Mousy looking guys like me holding the pole.
Exactly.
I'm interested in the editing of the second half of the film. Or it's not even the second half. It's really from the point when we introduce Turner's point of view as a point of view we can inhabit. Because I think that
because then you can do shot, reverse shot.
You can in a very interesting way, because shot, reverse shot, but it's two first-person perspectives, and the way the camera moves between them creates this interesting, I think, mental connection between the two characters. And I often find myself a little unsure at first in a lot of scenes. Okay, am I with Turner? Am I with
Absolutely.
Elwood? But to me, that's not a flaw of the filmmaking. It's a strength of the editing, which creates a continuity, but not in the way that we'd use continuity in editing typically, but a continuity between the headspace of our characters as they become more closely intertwined, as their
Sure.
friendship becomes deeper and deeper. And I think that that is in part why the hard movement to third person after Elwood is shot, and we see from his first person perspective him die to the back of Turner's head is so powerful, because this almost like free flowing movement between the perspectives of these two guys that, as you're saying, Tanner, have an ideological difference, but a personal, emotional connection is immediately severed. It's immediately gone. And I think that that is a really critical part of how the film operates. I think you can tell the bond the two form by how easily we move between their perspectives.
Sure. Yeah,
They are-
didn't consider that, but I think you're right.
Yeah.
They are really like the two characters who really see each other, and that is conveyed so strongly in the filmic language. And even the dialogue sequences between them, I love so much. The scenes where they're out on the street and Elwood thinks that he sees Martin Luther King Jr. standing on the sidewalk across the street, and he sprints across, and it's in fact just like a
Cardboard
a
cutout.
promotional cardboard cutout.
Where's that one of me? It's like that one that Tucker had made of me.
Oh yeah.
It's back there.
But no, like, yeah, and then Turner like gives him shit for it. He's like, you think that Martin Luther King is on the streets of Tallahassee for some reason? Like, really, are you so optimistic and so dogged in your belief that the civil rights movement is going to change the course of history, that you're willing to believe that? It's so far fetched to Turner. And then Turner, he has this story similar to that notion that's like, I walked by a sit-in protest at a diner one time, and they did do it. They did integrate that diner. More power to them. But I still didn't have the money because of my station in life, because of the color of my skin, to eat at that diner, which is such a powerful notion in itself. That like the civil rights movement did a lot for policy, but what did it do for the position in life of Black people in America?
It would have done a lot had they not killed Martin Luther King Jr., because he had arrived at that conclusion in the middle of the movement, but then had yet to really like implement it, and was rapidly going down the path of like left socialism by the time he was killed.
You think that's when they killed him, Timo?
And just so we're clear, I'm not putting they out there. I'm talking about the FBI.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Let's name and shame.
Well documented. Well documented.
I think this is such a critical part of the film, because there's a line from Turner that I think is so important. And it goes back to it's not even, optimism is an interesting word, because I feel like the more precise thing is there's sort of a feeling, I think, in Elwood's character that an individual has power to change the system with which they're in,
whether it be the racial tensions in America or the operations at Nickel Camp, or Nickel School.
And Turner disagrees with that. He has a line that I think is so interesting. It's something to the effect of like, you can what law isn't important. You can get a bunch of white people together and they'll change the law. But what's the effect? I mean, it's obviously written in a much nicer way than that in the script, but the
notion is the same,
The sentiment is important, because again, I think, a constant theme I've been hammering on, but I think a critical one is this notion of reconsidering the parameters of the civil rights movement and the role of law. It's, again, this is another reason why the film feels so prescient, as we're in a flurry of Trump signing any piece of paper they put in front of him. And the ways
that laws are fragile and can be,
exactly.
The things that we've gotten so accustomed to can really just be done away with the swipe of a pen. True.
And that in this movie, the law is like immoral, wrong, whatever, 100% of the time. The law is never shown to be good for the characters whatsoever.
Even like not even like the people who enforce it. The police obviously are corrupt and racist, but like the lawyer that Hattie Ingenue Ellis Taylor talks about,
Yeah.
He's like a coward.
He took my like $200 and skipped town. He said it was a miscarriage of justice and then just left.
That's such a great part because the private sector has failed now too.
Mm-hmm.
It is just this. I think that the film, although it doesn't become bogged down in class politics or anything, it is a doggedly leftist movie. I think.
Yeah.
It feels,
and
I was thinking to myself that at moments where I was like, this is feeling revolutionary in its ideology too. I don't think it arrives, it doesn't need to draw any conclusions about that, but it sprinkles it in and definitely is very class conscious, at least. Those lines,
I agree.
The lines about, well, it doesn't even matter that it's integrated. I never could have afforded it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I hint at that.
Yeah.
I think it's also what makes the turn in the narrative so tragic beyond it just being a well executed twist. This notion that Turner has to embody this character whose ideology got him killed really is hard, I think, to watch, and the way he struggles to try and find agency and want to be, give a testimony if he needs to. I think that there's a lot of charged senses of guilt and of responsibility. And I think that those are
Survivor's
questions.
guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. Well, I think that what makes the ending part so powerful as it pertains to the character arc of Trevor, what's his name? Turner. God.
Yeah.
Tanner and I have gotten this problem a lot of times. People call us Trevor or Tyler. There's a lot of, and I just did it, so
true.
I get it. I guess. Wow, that's crazy. But Turner's character arc is shown to us off screen, but that choice is so powerful in that once we learn that it is him, we have to come to grips with the fact that he has swapped his ideology and is now very like he's absorbed the part of Elwood that was wanting to learn a little bit more about this and uncover the past and make sure justice is prevailed. I mean, all that research that he's doing, the Turner that we knew previously would have been like, don't deal with that, like that, that's for either other people to do or no one to do at all because it's not worth the effort. And so it kind of makes sense in the mind of the viewer when we first think that it is Elwood doing the research. Like, yeah, okay, he's writing these things in his notebook. He wants to make sure Nickel is taken down and uncovered. But then once we learn that it's actually Turner, that like you get the character arc in that twist. You're like, oh, he has changed. He has Elwood's death has pushed him to become a different kind of person that is more interested in seeing this sort of thing come to light and see justice prevail. And I really love that is his character arc. And it's never actually said. It's only through the actions and the reveal of the twist that pushes you to empathize more with the character, but also realize the way in which he has changed over the course of the decades that this film, like in reality, actually spans.
I just had kind of an interesting thought about the final moments of the film. For once, an interesting thought from my mind.
Here we go.
That the solution that this film does posit for all of this is, I think, a very pragmatic and a very empathetic one, going along the lines of what the rest of the film is like. In that it's truth and reconciliation, in the coming out, the allowing the truth of what happened to be out and known, and to have your people affected by it and your perpetrators speak about it. It does show that our perpetrators got away scot-free and went on to live a nice lauded life.
Yes, the character of
the evil head
Hamish Linklater plays Spencer, one of the guy with the mustache. We see a newspaper clipping that he's like lauded as a community hero for doing something or other. Like, that's his legacy in that town, is be a local hero.
That's the single newspaper clipping that exists. But I like the forward looking and not it's not throwing its hands up. It's not giving us some crazy idea that is just like infeasible. It's just a very human reaction to something that is, while it still continues in some regards in some different manifestations, like this specific instance is over and done. And so what do you do about that, both as an individual and as a society? That's what that kind of like final little montage is speaking to me about.
I think it's a open question as well, because we don't necessarily see Turner as Elwood take action. I think we see him struggle with what that action is, and moreover, what responsibility is put on him fairly and unfairly societally to be the voice and be the educator about what happened at Nickel. I think that the film is not as simple in its depiction that the in some ways martyrdom of Elwood changes Turner into another person. I think it saddles Turner with a responsibility that he shouldn't have had to bear the burden of.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's why the film, to me, feels so melancholy in a lot of ways.
It's like somber at
absolutely.
the end.
Yeah, that's why I think it's so interesting. The film is not necessarily taking a side against, you know, the optimism versus the realism necessarily. Like, Elwood isn't punished by the movie for wanting better things. Like, he is lauded as this figure who is very smart and is only trampled upon by the institutions that deny him the future that he was aiming towards, that he deserved for all of his intelligence and all of his, you know, his niceties and everything like that.
There's
you go ahead.
Well, there's a beautiful moment at the beginning of the film that is so cinematic. It really calls attention to itself in a way that I don't think a lot of moments do, and it's so important. It's the moment where we see the pamphlet about the college that Elwood is supposed to go to slide down the refrigerator.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I want to know how they like timed that. How many shots that took, or takes that took. I was thinking about that.
Magnet on the inside of the refrigerator.
Oh.
You got a PA. You got a PA in that lead-lined refrigerator that he's just sliding it down. They didn't take the back off it or anything. Like, he crammed himself right in there and he's moving it down slowly.
Yeah, that's probably.
It's this.
Oh wow!
It's this beautiful image,
visual metaphor right there.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, you know, we know that there's a guy somehow controlling the sliding of the pamphlet, but this notion that this future we literally see slipping away.
Yes.
And slipping away.
Because he never ends up going there. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it slips away as our characters are preoccupied elsewhere. I think is very interesting.
Yeah. And the swaying of the camera back and forth, I think that's the really interesting cinematic moment of that.
Because he's
There's a
watching.
moment.
He's watching as it slides down, but he is forced to look at who he's speaking to be, you know, a member of society.
Yeah. But to the point that I was making all the way at the beginning of this, that is very much a person who's distracted and their mind is sort of floating between things. That swaying of the camera between talking to Nana and then like, oh, this thing is kind of drifting down. Obviously, he's not thinking of like the future is slipping away from me. He's like,
of course.
Oh, that's kind of like interesting. Like he's just like, oh, that's the thing that's happening, and my attention is called to it. And my favorite moment that Abram, I thought you were going to reference that is very call attention to itself, is somewhere near that in the film, but it's the moment in which young Elwood is standing by a television store, technology store of some sort, and is watching TV. And it's like Florida oranges are the greatest goddamn fruit ever made. No, it's
grapefruit.
Florida grapefruits are a great fruit. And he's watching this like dumb little advertisement, and then it goes static, and we get the sound like sort of behind us as these as Nana and some older women are talking, and then we see this reflection with all these televisions of this child, and And then Martin Luther King comes on screen and is giving a speech, and all the people, you see the reflection of all the people start to like gather around him, and I was transfixed
Yes.
by that moment. I think that's my favorite shot in the movie, because not only is it technically very impressive, the way that it's still very clear, the outlines of the people and the reflection, but also what's going on screen. It's also a one take thing. This kid is standing there like perfectly still the entire time, and there's so much layered conversation and sound design and world building as the people sort of come into frame. It's I've never seen a shot like that before, and so I was really, really blown away by the technical and creative prowess of like executing on that kind of shot.
And that just like every single reflection shot, it has some wizardry going on in it to make it happen.
Yeah, of
like
course.
those are not possible without help. I'll shout out the poster shot, the one where we have our characters looking up at this mirrored ceiling.
Yes.
You know, every shot in a movie,
Bro, they got reverse tech neck
they do
that day.
every time you view characters through a reflection, I always interpret that with a lot of meaning, because we're being very intentional as filmmakers to show not the characters as they are, but as they are reflected through something else. And so them both looking up to see, they have to be looking up to see the ceiling, but our perspective of them, or as them, of them standing there, is looking down on them. And so it's just this very, sometimes it can be hard. I can struggle to like actually pull out like one single sentence that would describe what the meaning of such mirror shots are. But given that this is a first person movie, it's one of the few tools we have to both be in that first person and see what our character is thinking or musing about with their face.
I'll do a quick rundown of scenes / shots that I really loved and I think carry a lot of weight to them, and so you guys can jump in if you have any thoughts on it. The boxing match, incredible. Like that whole thing. Griff is the boxer character, I believe, correct?
Yes.
I mean that when he wins the fight, and I mean the moment before he wins, and Elwood looks over at Turner, and he has this very weighty, heavy line of like, "This is not the fight. This isn't the fight." Line, and then Griff wins, and then he's being celebrated. His hands being held up. Everyone from the all the black kids from Nickel are going crazy because this is such a huge deal for them to win this match that only happens once a year against like the white side of the camp, essentially. But Griff knows that he should have taken the dive because now he knows he's going to get killed, and the insistency, the repeated line of "I thought it was the second. I didn't know. I thought it was the second." And like the third or fourth time he says it is when everyone actually hears him and goes quiet. Or do they go quiet, or is it just imagined moment to give that
hard to tell,
the sadness of that, the realization of that weight, and of course then like Griff's death is kind of what really spurs on this thing of like, we should expose what's going on here. The scene between Turner and Hattie, the scene and Anjou Ellis Taylor's character, that hug, she is fucking incredible in that scene. I mean, she is in a way the like beating heart of this movie, that she radiates like love and attention and care, and this again this expectation or this realization that like Elwood, my grandson, who I love so much and I've looked after for most of his life, is in this place. They're telling me I can't see him. I'm not stupid. I know what's going on here. I know what this means, but I'm simply powerless to be able. I have no clue if I'll see him again. And then, of course, when Turner shows up at her door, when she breaks down, there's absolutely heart-wrenching moment as she realizes the reality of it, but still folds Turner in and makes the decision essentially to pass on Elwood's identity to him to keep him safe by extension. I mean, she is such a heartwarming character in this that sort of rides the waves of this film being so heartfelt, and then how dour it can get at times as well. Shots that I like, the guy on stilts in like the orange patch, love that when he just like looks over at him walking by on the stilts, love that. the shots of like whenever the alligator pops up or like the mule in the hallway are great stuff. Love those.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think we should really also talk about the way in which, while this movie is very committed to its cinematic styling of a first-person perspective, a very believable first-person perspective, it is not locked to that. And I think that and not only with the interspersed footage as we mentioned earlier, but also lots of hyper close-ups with really shallow depth of field.
Of course, yes. That kind of makes up like the first chunk of the first 5-10 minutes of the movie. Yeah.
Yeah. But those are also interspersed across the entirety of it. And I think it's interesting that they give themselves the space to add these moments, or also the moments of surreality, or maybe there was a mule in there. Like,
it's thematic. It's filmic language. Yeah.
But moments of surreality and these hyper close-ups that are not our characters literally looking at things, as most of the movie is, but it is indeed what they're feeling or what they are focused on. The surreality is more of like the fear or the confusion or whatever in these surreal moments, and the hyper close-ups are what they're focused on in the scene, like what their ear is tuned to or what their mind is really focused on. Those moments are really, really interesting that they are able to pepper that in a movie that is otherwise like one type of shot.
Yeah,
I like that there is some texture to that. It's not just literally one thing.
There's plenty of texture to it. Yeah. The first one that I know, the reason that I regrettably pulled out my phone in the theater and started taking notes on dark mode, don't worry, is the shot of like the pickup truck with the cross dragging it down the road and the sparks flying off.
Yeah, it's very...
I mean, there's so many examples of incredible imagery in this thing. And that was like the first one that was like slapped me in the face, was like, whoa, that's a powerful fucking image that Ross just created. And then, yeah, the car rolling up, and that's the whole inciting incident of the film, basically.
To think, I just realized like that guy fumbles with the lock for so long because he's never driven the car before.
Yeah,
we had on the shoot I was on this previous weekend. We were doing a take, and it was with a car, and they had to unlock it and move around it quickly, and they kind of fumbled with it, and so we had a discussion like, well, was that okay? Like, could they fumble with it? It was like, yeah, they just stole this car. They don't know how the locks work.
Filmmaking.
That's right. Very, very astute. One last thing I want to say, and then I'll open it up to anybody else, and we can give it a score. In doing my research, I found a piece of writing from film Twitter's favorite Miami Vice enthusiast, Brandon Strusing, and he had an interview with RaMell Ross, where RaMell really gets into, him and Brandon both really get into like the film theory side of this thing, like RaMell's theories or ideas about decentralizing the Eurocentric, the white gaze, or the white camera as it exists, and really like centering and focusing the lives of Black people on camera, which are very fraught and everything like that, and really trying to take an entirely different filmic approach to this film and how it's constructed by trying to separate himself from the classical white Hollywood sort of style of filmmaking that has existed since the invention of the camera by a white Christian guy. So I mean, it's a really, really engaging piece of writing that I would be remiss not to bring attention to, but as a bit out of our purview to tackle here in this review. And to that extent, I think also a very purposeful inclusion of the footage of the Defiant Ones, which is this 1958 directed by a white guy idea of like healing racial tensions in some way in a similar type of setting as this film.
I have to go get my notes from when I was in class about this film, but it's a stock standard, albeit well made and more nuanced than most social issue films would get.
Yeah.
And you get it's really that star power of Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis. And Tony Curtis is pretty much a racist in the movie, so him having to deal with physically being chained to Lumet is important. And
Poitier.
No, Poitier, not Lumet.
Different guy.
Different very different guy.
Director, not actor. I have too many names rolling around in my head.
Yeah. Do we want to do the Oscar details?
Oh yes, of course. Well, there's a very simple
details.
one. Because unfortunately, this film was undernominated, I would contend. Only nominated for Best Picture and Best Adapted Screenplay.
Yeah, where's the
that's good.
cinematography nod?
Yep. I would.
That's for
I'd throw cinematography and director in their bar minimum.
Oh,
Editing,
absolutely.
I would say.
Yeah.
Sure. But who gotta give direction.
I mean, you got to put him in.
James Mangold, baby.
You
Let's go.
gotta put him in. I think Complete Unknown is also in editing, if I remember correctly, as too. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it.
And probably cinematography while we're at it.
Yeah, I don't think so. But yeah.
But
Yes.
I won't win either of those, probably.
No, unfortunately not.
Unfortunately not. Well, if you like the plot of this one, Colson Whitehead's books, The Harlem Shuffle, the first one, I can't remember what the second. Oh, is it up there? No. Very good books. That guy's a really good author and writes really entertaining prose. We didn't really the kind of prose of Whitehead's, I didn't really think like filtered into this because I think we were filtered through so much other goodness in like the prose of the filmmaking because we're in a different medium, right? But if you're just looking for like really, really entertaining books to read, Colson Whitehead's a great place to go because those just, they're page turners because it's so wondrous and joyful to read the words he puts on the page.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Good
4 o'clock.
stuff.
Cool.
Good stuff.
Alrighty. I'm ready with my score. You guys ready?
I'm ready with my score.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's find out where Nickel Boys goes. 3, 2, 1. We've got our score.
Oh.
It's pretty high up there. I'll spoil it. It's going at number 1. Nickel Boys got a 9.4 from our aggregate board. The point breakdown is Abram and I gave it a 9.0. Then Tucker gave it a 9.6. And Tanner gave it a flat 10. So we've got 2 10s on the board so far. And that's going to put Nickel Boys above the Brutalist at spot number 1. So since we're here halfway through the list, a little reminder of where it stands right now. Our new edition, Nickel Boys at spot number 1, then the Brutalist. Conclave is at spot number 3, then Honora at spot number 4, and finally Amelia Perez at spot number 5.
As of now, and we still have half the nominees to go.
Have to go, so keep it tuned here. Tanner,
Yes.
what are we going to do next time?
Speaking of putting 10s on the board.
Oh boy. Next time we are going to do
Wicked.
Next time we are going to do the oldest film that we'll be talking about in this series.
Ooh, way back in the past.
Yeah, you gotta go way back to March 2024, casted by back to when Dune Part 2 hit theaters. Yeah. Oh, we remember it so well. Yes, we already talked about first Dune a couple of years ago when it was nominated for Best Picture, and we're repeating it. We're repeating the trend. We're going again. Going back to Arrakis.
Back to Arrakis. Oh, I'm excited.
Arrakis on Arrakis.
Ooh.
That right there is my framed mini poster I got from the preview IMAX screening of Dune, so I don't think it's going to be any surprise where I land
What
on
you
this
give
one.
it? I'm really...
And you also have an Arrakis.
Yeah,
I have another
like a
Arrakis
travel
poster there.
poster.
And this will be my this will be my 5th viewing of the film.
There you go. Well, hey,
Nice.
you're still quite a ways off from Mac from Twitter or whatever.
I am.
Who's seen
He's
it
unimpeachable.
232 times, I want to say.
That's so stupid.
No, I don't.
man.
It's less than that, but I forget how
It's
many it is.
40
Just
something.
just
Yeah.
watch Community like 5 times. Why are you watching Dune Part 2 so
Community,
much?
I like Community. But that's a weird pull.
What?
Well, it's
right,
it's a
Tim.
rewatchable TV show. That was my... I am
First of
excited.
first of 2 Timmy movies that we'll be discussing in this series.
Yeah.
as well.
Ooh,
The 2 Tims.
big year for O Chalamet.
Oh, one last thing I want to mention about Nickel Boys. Fred Heschinger, absolutely prolific in 2024. This is his 4th movie that came out in 2024. He was the guy that was like driving the pickup truck with him.
Oh,
Kind of a long hair, blonde, white dude.
the guy with the sniper at the end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He was in Nickel Boys, Thelma, Gladiator 2, and Craven the Hunter.
Yeah.
Wow.
He's the Weasley brother in both Craven and Gladiator 2.
Exactly.
He's the second the second emperor.
Yeah.
And then
When
he's
they go on the central
Chameleon
casting like
Craven.
Google page and they look up like Weasley brother and he's the first
Yes,
thing
I
that
mean,
shows up.
He is quite Weasley in this one as well.
Yeah, he's a bit of a snake.
hmm
Epic.
Dune Part 2 has its own snakes. We will talk about them,
Yes.
and we will talk about
They're worms. They're
the
worms.
worms, the
The
spice,
Shai-Halud.
the spice, the water of life, and everything else that's nice about
Desert power.
yeah,
The spice
desert
must
power.
flow.
I'm excited. I can't wait to talk about it. Until then, though, stay tuned here. Backlot Banter. We got more Oscars coverage coming up, as well as our little weekly movie reviews. Write your thoughts if you went and saw Nickel Boys in theaters, or if you watched it since then some other way. Down in the comments. Abrams making a funny
I was gonna
face.
weigh in on the whole pirating Nickel Boys thing, but I don't even
No,
wanna,
let's not.
I don't even wanna do that.
We can't end every episode with the film Twitter drama about the Best Picture nominees. Not every single one.
Not every
right?
single one. Okay, that'll do it for us. Stick around. Dune Part 2 up next. And you know what I always say: stay cool, keep warm. Peace.
I walked into my
Anyway.
Nickel Boys screening a little bit late, so the only trailer I saw ahead of it was for A Working Man.
Yeah,
Oh, we
we
also
got
got
that one
today.
too.
Good. Hey, human traffickers beware. You know what
Human
I mean?
traffickers beware. Department isn't the Drug Enforcement Agency called out in that trailer as being evil and corrupt?
Everything
like
is evil and corrupt except for the working man,
It's-
Timo.
Yeah.
So true, man.
Except for the working men at FEMA.